I've always been interested in history, and in the village of Bath, with its history, you can't help but being interested and involved. Yes. My full name is Cynthia Rose Flavel, Rose for my mother. I was born in Toronto in 1930. At the end of 1968, I moved with my husband and our small daughter. We wanted a house of our own and didn't find anything suitable to our needs in Kingston, so we built a house in Bath. There was a grocery store for a while on the main street, and of course we had a bank and a post office. We had the services. We did small things in the village, until our very capable clerk instituted Canada Day. It brought so many former residents and relatives, and everybody became involved. My daughter and I rode on one of the floats one year. I remember that, It was a great time in the village. This property, one of the few remaining structures in this province that was built before 1800. Actually, we have two of them in this village. The two of the Fairfield brothers built the house, William Jane Jr. and Benjamin. They had a farm here, but mostly they were in business. But the brothers themselves, of course, were tremendously influential in this area. William Jr. particularly served on the jury of the Court of Quarter Session a few times, then became a magistrate and presided over some of these session meetings. Benjamin was the more active of the two in the business, but he also was elected to the legislature. I think he was there for about 4 years. They were also involved in the building of the academy, very strong supporters of St. John's Church. They were solid pillars of this community, yes. The property stayed with the Fairfields till somewhere in the 1960s, when I think one of the descendants lost it. It had several owners after that, and then in 1938, Mabel Fairfield Goodsite bought it and brought it back into the Fairfield family again. She lived here with her husband, Dr. William Goodsite. He was a doctor of music. Mabel Fairfield met him in New York when she was working as a nurse. And they came to Canada, lived for some years in Toronto. He had a studio in Toronto. And then when Mabel wanted to bring the building back into the family, he, of course, came with her. And he was quite active in the local church. And, I know that he played the organ at St. John's Church occasionally, and he also led the choir at St. Andrew's Church in Kingston. We were told that he used to bring the choir out here occasionally for picnics and events, yes. He apparently used to attend most of the auctions in Toronto. And sometimes he picked up some bargains. Mrs. Goodsight always called the collection the Old Masters, but an assessment after her death decided they were mostly copies, except that one up there. I think that painting, which is of a Scottish clergyman's wife, I think it was brought to Toronto by her son and later put up for sale when Dr. Goodsight obtained it. Yes. People do like to see them. This one here was one, I think, of 2 or 3 that 2 of our members took into Queen's art department to have them refurbished. And I remember the curator, who was Amanda Gray, saying that it just about drove one of the students crazy doing all the repair on that ruffled collar. Yes. But they're interesting. Copies are not. They are very interesting, I think. Mm-hmm. The Reverend John Langhorne is a very interesting character, was a very interesting character. In the very early days after the settlement, any people who wanted to attend church services could go on occasional Sundays to Captain Hawley's house, and the minister from Kingston would come out. But then they asked him, this was the Reverend Stewart, that if the government would send out one of the missionaries that they used to have in New England. And the request was approved, and the Reverend John Langhorne landed here in 1787. He was a character, really. He was a corpulent man. He apparently walked all the time with his knapsack and his Bible. He was a man of strong habits and convictions. He lived for a long time in addition to the Hawley house. He wouldn't allow anyone to come into his room, even to make his bed. He was used to bathing, so he went into the water every day. Winter, he managed to cut a hole through the ice to bathe. And he was a real problem to his superiors. The Bishop of Nova Scotia said that he was uncouth and little acquainted with the world, but a worthy, conscientious man, diligent and of a humane, benevolent disposition. He found out that North America was not to his taste. For one thing, they weren't paying him what he was entitled to. It wasn't until 1791 that the government finally paid him all that they owed him. And it was a very rough territory that he had to cover to try and service people who wanted some religion in their life. He wrote here in 1788, "In this journey I lost my road 3 times abominably, had an escape from staying in the woods all night, and was so bitten by the gnats that one hand was exceedingly swelled. Besides all the dangers from wolves and bears, and the chance of getting amongst poisonous plants. In 1793, I believe, he moved from Hawley's extension and said he was living with a stepdaughter of Captain Hawley in a house on the same lot as the church. Well, that was this house. The stepdaughter was Nabby Fairfield, who lived here with her husband Benjamin and their family. And I think that Langhorne lived here for the rest of his time in Canada. I think also that he may well have been here when the Americans raided in the fall of 1812. And I think that combined with his poor health convinced him to leave for England in the spring of 1813. So he resigned and went back to England. And his records are very, very important to some people doing genealogy because he was meticulous about record keeping. He was quite a character, really. Yes.
As we journey through Loyalist Township, we are reminded of the rich tapestry of history sewn into the land. The people who call this place home have created a diverse and vibrant community with roots that stretch back for generations. But let us remember the land's original inhabitants, the Haudenosaunee, Mississauga, Amama-Winini, and indigenous peoples. Their stories and those of the Loyalists who settled here are woven into the very fabric of this land. As we wander through the historic hamlets of Amherst Island, Amherstview, Bath, Odessa, and Wilton, each field is a testament to the resilience of those who came before us, carving out a life on the shores of Lake Ontario. It is not enough to simply admire the past. We must also strive to preserve it. Storytelling and oral history provide an insight into the daily lives of those before us, the history you do not read in a textbook. We owe it to ourselves and those who will come after us to honor the legacy of those who have come before us. As we continue our journey through the historic hamlets of Loyalist Township, we move between two places connected by more than just geography, Bath and Wilton. With its quaint streets and historic homes, Bath was one of the first settlements established by the British United Empire Loyalists fleeing the American Revolution. For generations, families have put down roots on this land, building homes, raising children, and contributing to the community. Wilton is a small hamlet nestled in the rolling hills of the countryside. It was named after a town in England and is rooted in the soil of the surrounding farms and the community. Today, it is a place where neighbors continue to look out for one another, gather together, and where the simple pleasures of life are savored. The strong roots that families have put down in Bath and Wilton demonstrate the significance of establishing oneself within a community, creating a sense of identity and culture that endures through the years and provides a firm foundation for a vibrant and thriving place to call home.
My name is Richard Calvert-Revelle. August 21st, 1952 was my birthday. I grew up in the Wilton, Odessa areas. We lived in Odessa twice. We lived in the Wilton area 3 times. My first 2 years of school was at Thorpe, one-room schoolhouse. And then when I was in grade 3, we moved to Odessa, there till October of grade 8. and moved to Wilton, and I enjoyed living here. We lived right beside this hall that we're in now. This hall was the United Church. Where we lived was owned by the cheese factory, this house next door. And I walked to school over here. It was a 2-room school then. So I worked at the cheese factory for a little bit. You'd always hang around if there was cheese boxes coming in because they'd pay you 50 cents to throw the cheese boxes up from the truck up. But I was a paper boy here, and I took it over from Don Smith. I had to go up to the corner to pick up the papers. Guy named Bolton. He brought them from Kingston and dropped them off. On Saturdays, I had to go to Odessa to McMillan's Shell to pick the papers up because they wouldn't bring them this far. They paid me 50 cents to go over there. So my route was from there and then up over the Graveyard Hill almost as far as Florida Road to MacArthur's, and then the Switzer's nursing home. And that was 32 papers. Yeah, so that was my job growing up, and I probably made a couple dollars a week, which in the 60s is a lot of money. $2 a week, you could buy a bag of chips and a Coke for a quarter, chocolate bar for a dime. But I enjoyed growing up in Wilton. Wilton was a neat place in the 60s. You could go out, play ball hockey, play basketball at the Smiths, the Simmons. There was 2 businesses then. There was there was the cheese factory, the store, with the post office, and everybody would sit there. That was the only businesses. There was just that. That's the business center on that side of the creek of Wilton. There was nothing else. The feed mill, the store, and the cheese factory. All the commerce in Wilton took place there. When I was a kid, there was always that hint of being indigenous. Grandma, she keeps secrets very well. I never really heard about this story till after she passed. But when I was growing up, you didn't know this. This was a well-kept secret because they didn't want to work. They wanted to work, and if you told them they were Native, you weren't going to get a job in the 30s and 40s. Grandpa bought his first farm. He never couldn't borrow money from the bank. Bank wouldn't lend him money because they knew he was Native, so he had to borrow money from the lawyer that closed it. I think he was always afraid that they would ask, and it was a secret until I'm about 40-some years old. Art Coda, who was a cousin, his father and my grandfather's father were brothers. His father was named Joseph. I got this thing in the mail. I don't know why I got it in the mail. It was addressed to somebody in Pittsburgh. I got it in the mail in Kingston, and it was a hunting license. So I phoned up Art Coda, and I said, do you know this person? Because I got their hunting license in the mail. And Art says, no, you don't need a hunting license, Rick. We're all Indians. I said, what? Oh yeah, the Codas, we're all indigenous. So then I said to my mother, you know we're indigenous? Yeah, we just didn't talk about it. Art was quite proud of it. I joined Ardok Algonquin First Nation. They took me in bang like that because they knew my history. I had to supply the family tree and that. And Randy, Art's son, was the chief, and so pretty proud of that. So then after that, somebody asked, I'm indigenous. That's who I am. My mother became very proud of that fact after it could get released and let out. So anyway, I found out I was indigenous when I was about 40. The secret was out. When I was 22, I played ball back in, it was called the North Addington League, and I played for a team in Roblin. And I was playing for Nortel at the time. They were playing in the City League. And I pitched and played shortstop, and I thought, I can run ball team better than this. So it was like, you see these movies where you guy goes to, this isn't like a prison, but I'm just relating like the Magnificent Seven. You go and say, do you want to go with me when I'm doing this job? Or, like in the Dirty Dozen, you go and you pick these. I just went to my friends. And the first year we went in the Lowborough League, which was a 14-team league, and we won it. We were behind 3-0 in one series, and we came back and won it. In the championship series, we were behind 3-1, and we won it. And I had 2 years, we went in the Frontenac League with Verona and Harrismith Juniors and Sharbert Lake and Joyfield Penitentiary. And we finished second to Verona each year, but we won the Ontario Championships. And on that team, I had 3 cousins, Murray and David and Paul Blakely, and then Larry and Mike McNeil, and their brother-in-law, David Peters, Timmy Griffin from Bath, Chuck Sagriff, who's kind of a legend in Odessa, he's passed now, Wayne Bedard played for me, and Harvey played short, and everybody was related, and they were either from Wilton or Odessa area. And we were just a little town, and we would draw 1,000 people to the ballparks when we were playing in the OESA championships. It was amazing. And we were a going concern. Softball was king then in the 70s. There wasn't all this video games and phones and everything. You probably get 2 or 3 channels on the TV, so you would come out and watch ball games. So that would be the 1977 team, because we won it in Odessa. In 76, we went to Temagami. Most of those guys, probably half from Wilton and Odessa, and the McNeil brothers lived just this side of in Loyalist Township. Our team was a good ball team. I coached the Eastman Cree Nation team at 2 men's Canadian championships, and they were from East Main, Quebec, which is right on Hudson's Bay. You have to go in a hydro road to get to them. They wanted an indigenous coach, and I was a level 4, so they got a hold of Softball Ontario, and they said, have you got any indigenous coaches at a level 4? Because you need at least a level 3 coach. And yeah, they got a hold of me. They paid all my expenses. And so anyway, we're in St. Thomas. This is the second time I'm with them. And we're waiting to get on the ball diamond, and I'm standing beside Ray Chanus, and he started laughing. I said, what are you laughing about, Ray? So there's these 2 young guys sitting down, just up at the other end of the players' bench, and they're just sitting there with their legs crossed. And there was a flock of geese, about 50 or 60 of them, high up in the air. And he says, watch this. So these kids, this ball game's going on, it's about the 6th inning, and they called these geese in. And they're sitting there like that. And the ball game's going on, and 50 or 60 geese land in the outfield. The outfielders are standing there going, what the hell is going on here? The umpires say, time. And these guys are laughing. Nobody knows why they landed. I'm probably one of the only ones other than these guys know why they landed. And they were 15 to 20 minutes getting the geese off the field. And I tell that story when I go into schools about how Native people emulate, how they watch wildlife, and how they emulate to hunt. And that's one of the stories I tell at every school I go to about how, calling in the geese. It was amazing. I was at LCVI in October, and I was doing a grade 11. It was 11, because grade 11 English class have to use indigenous authors and indigenous books. And he came up to me. He had this plastic that you get from Staples, and inside it was a bookmark and my autograph. Because I went to a school, Winston Churchill, in grade 5, and he got my autograph. And the bookmark was from the first book. It might have been the first 2. There might have been 2 books on the bookmark. And he brought it, and he wanted me to autograph again. He wanted a new bookmark. And It was a surreal moment for me. As a writer, you don't realize how you touch people. But I think the thing that really struck me the most, and just from the story I told about my family hiding who they were because they wanted to work, because they were afraid, because, you know, in the teens, in the 20s and 30s and 40s and the 50s, you didn't want to be known as indigenous. I was back at Granite Ridge, which is in Charlotte Lake. I was doing a grade 2 class. This little girl puts up her hand. She's, I think I've got it right, her name is Mariah. She says, my name is Mariah, and I'm an Algonquin person. And I thought, wow. I thought to myself, I couldn't do that when I was in grade 2. The kids would take me outside in the schoolyard and beat me up. She sat down, and so I continued on, a little choked up about this, and this little guy puts up his hand. Remember, this is grade 2. And he stands up, and he says, my name is such and such. And Mariah, she's an Algonquin, and she's my friend. He sits down. And then a little girl puts up her hand, and she says, my name is such and such. And Mariah's an Algonquin person, and she's my friend. And right there, I'm choked up. I look at the teacher, and I said, I am so honored to be in your class, that you've made this class, these children feel so protected, that they can get up and say who they are without any fear of any repercussions. I said, this is how much school has advanced since I've been to school. And they're proud of who they are. And they will put up their hands and say, and I said, that light shines on you because as a teacher, you've created this atmosphere in this classroom. And I tell that story quite a bit. I get a few teachers kind of, a little tear come in their eye. But that is so important. You don't realize how important that is. That I couldn't do that 65 years ago when I started the school, in that 2-room schoolhouse in Thorpe. But of all the things that's touched me the most. Anyway, so that really struck me. So.
The journey from Wilton to Odessa is a winding road, binding them together in a shared history of hard work, perseverance, and community. It has seen the rise of farms and mills, the growth of businesses and schools, and the comings and goings of families for generations. Odessa is a small hamlet known for its beautiful natural landscapes and the meandering Millhaven Creek. The town was first settled in the early 19th century and named after the Ukrainian village of Odessa. Many of the town's original buildings, including its church and mill, still stand today and serve as a reminder of the town's past. These two communities have relied on one another over the years. Odessa and Wilton have joined together for everything from schooling, industry, sports teams, and community events. These towns are a testament to the power of unity and friendship forged over the decades and many journeys up and down Old Wilton Road.
I'm Donald Oscar Aubrey Babcock.
I'm Ross Frederick John Babcock.
I was born in July 11th, 1942.
I was born November 15th, 1939.
I was born in Odessa in a stone house that's just across the road off Factory Street. Till 1975, I built a house north of Odessa on the Red Brown Road, and I've lived there ever since.
And I was born in the same stone house over on Factory Street. John is our younger brother. He lives in Napanee, and my father is Roy Hazel Babcock. He was born April 4th, 1911. Our mom's was Frances Margaret Elizabeth Pringle. Her family goes back to John Joseph Pringle or Prindle, that was a United Emperor Loyalist. Our Babcocks has been around the village for about 200 years. Our great-great-grandfather, Zebba Babcock, was married to Sarah Snyder. She was a daughter of John Joseph Snyder. John gave Sarah the east half of Lot 29 in the 4th Township here in Amhersttown. And they moved there and built a house just west of the high school on the south side of number 2 now. Back in 1822, when they moved here, there was already a grist mill. Well, we knew it as the Wright grist mill up on the north side of the main street, number 2 highway. It was about the only thing in the village at that time. Now, my great-great-grandfather, John Babcock, he was a wheelwright and built wagons and sleighs. Then my grandfather, John Herbert Babcock, he operated a chair factory north of the village on the creek where 401 highway is now. And there's a photo of the chair factory with the locals in the picture. My grandfather and John Manker are up in the top of the mill looking out of the door, and their wives are down in a buggy. That mill burned in 1895. And my grandfather moved south of the village to Lot 29, Concession 3, and bought the what was known then as the Asseltine Mill. There was no mill at that time, and he built a mill there, fixed the dam, and got it working again, and had the mill down there until he sold it to Anglin's in 1906. After selling that, he moved to Westbrook for a short time, bought a mill there, but basically took the sawing equipment out of that mill and moved it here to the village. In 1907, he bought the Babcock Mill here that we're in, along with the sawmill from the Booth family. The Babcock Mill here was just a building. It was built in 1856 by the Saul brothers. It was designed originally to be a grist mill by the Booths. They were going to install the equipment and that, but by 1856, the Grand Trunk Railway was through, and the cheap grain was available from Montreal and Toronto, and Booths never bothered to install the grain grinding equipment. So when Granddad bought it, it was just basically an empty building. And he installed all the equipment that you see here for planing lumber. They would saw the lumber in the sawmill next door and then bring it over here and plane it. My grandfather, he built cheese boxes and that in the mill south of the village, the old Asseltine Mill, and then here in the Babcock Mill, he put out in the equipment to build his close hampers and the Babcock baskets. He was granted a couple of patents, patent 161, 924, and 192, 659 on the Babcock baskets in 1915 and 1919. coming up into the future, we started building truck bodies here in O'Donnell.
Around 1947.
1947, roughly.
Our uncle Oscar Babcock, Dad's brother, and that he lived in Toronto, and he worked for a company called Tipper Richardson, and it was like a moving company and that. And my grandmother passed away in 1946. And Oscar moved back shortly after that, and Dad and him went into partnerships to build truck bodies. So basically in 1947, all the basket making equipment was all through and all in this area over into here. Dad removed all that stuff, carried it upstairs, put on the upper floor, and they built racks all in there to install all the different sizes of aluminum for the truck bodies and that. Basically over there on Factory Street. There was, he eventually, over the years, he had bought that. It used to be, I believe it was a woolen mill.
Yeah, it was the Booth Woolen Mill there.
He bought that eventually, and he installed equipment in that and water wheels, run a shaft off the main shaft off here and run down through there and put in 2 small wheels, and actually was the first person to light the village in 1922.
Yeah, 1922,
and they did it for almost pretty near 10 years. They lit the village, and then they sold out to Ontario Hydro around 1932.
Yeah, there was a report of the Napanlee Beaver that stated that Mr. Babcock had his house beautifully lighted and was going to be selling hydro to the village.
Yeah.
And during that time, Dad would have been 12 years old, and he actually, when Granddad got some of the places lighted in the village, Dad would take the hydro bills around and deliver them. And
another thing my grandfather did, so also, he went to bed at 10 o'clock at night, he would shut the wheels off and the village would go dark.
Yeah.
So the council meeting, they met in the old town hall and that, and lots of times they were shut out in the dark if the meeting went past 10 o'clock at night.
Yeah. Just pull the switch and
yeah,
that was it for them.
Yeah. Dad sold the mill to the township about 1970. 76, 77, somewhere in that area. Government gave the township money to restore and get the mill up to shape and stuff like that. The Parks and Recreation Director, Pat Byer, he approached me about getting the basket making equipment going again. And I told him, well, if we can't make a weaving mill or a weaving machine, you can't make a basket because you got to be able to weave the wood and the wire together. And the 2 weaving machines, they were sold into a card brush factory in Newburgh and that. And now, fortunately, all the other stuff from that, there was no reason Dad needed to get rid of it. He just carried everything up and put it on the 3rd floor. And downstairs we have what we call a slat knife, and they carry that out the back door. And there's a shed. You've seen it as you come up the hill. There's a shed there. It used to have a roof and everything on it. And Dad just put it out on the shed there, and it sat there basically until the township moved it back inside after they'd bought the mill. So I said, well, we're trying to make some drawings and stuff, Ross and me and that, to see if we can get a weed machine going. So over the winter of 1985 and spring of 1986, I built the first one in my basement on my house in Fred Brown Road.
Grandad never made any drawings or anything like that, so it was just a matter of what we remembered from when we were kids, that we would, weave a few slats.
So then in 1986, the township hired me on a 6-month contract to get everything else in place and getting everything else and running and like that. So even with the machine, even though Dad had moved the machine up to the 2nd floor, this line shaft that you see running back across here, the pulleys and everything was still on the line shaft because there's no reason of removing all that. He just removed the belt and that, so he knew where everything was going to set so he just moved everything back in place and hooked up had to buy new belts and stuff like that and get them all running and connected everything up. So I had to make 2 weaving machines. I had to make a new sanding drum. Then this would slowly tumble over a period of about 24 hours. You had to run the things. You run it basically every day for 6 or 8 hours and run it for the whole week. And then on the thing they would just stand themselves, just sliding over top of each other than that. Because when you cut the slats with a slat sizing knife, then they're dried in a dry kiln, which I had to rebuild that, and that's behind you right there, the dry kiln. So I had a lot to do in 1987. And the mill was open for tours also at the time. They hired 2 students, Marie's there and Sharon Mason was the 2 students that was hired for that summer. So they done a lot of painting that year, too, in between doing tours and that.
Donald and I would show the kids around, and one of the highlights of the tour was back when we were able to put the stop logs in.
Turn the water wheel on.
Open the water wheel, and the kids would be just amazed at all the noise of the line slapped to the belts, and that was really the high point of the tour. But anyhow, yeah.
The journey continues from Odessa to Amherstview, on the eastern outskirts of Loyalist Township and the banks of Lake Ontario. Once a quiet farming community, Amherstview has grown into a large residential populace. The Fairfield House, a historic home and museum, serves as a reminder of the area's agricultural past. The house dates back to the early 1800s and is one of the oldest standing structures in Loyalist Township. A thriving homestead of agriculture and production, the Fairfield House is a testament to a simpler time, and the memories of what once was can still be found within the walls. While Odessa and Amherstview have unique identities, they are connected by their growth toward a faster pace of life.
Well, I was 13 years old, growing up in a hotbed of democratic socialism. They were called the CCF at that time, Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. And so I had this friend of mine, his name was Steve Penner. His father was a former member of the Labor Progressive Party, which happened to be called the Communist Party. So we're political junkies, and that's how I got involved in local government. My name is Paul Gilmore. I live in Amherstview, Ontario. I was born November 29th, 1943 in the city of Toronto. And I moved down to Amherstview with a young baby, 4 months old, my wife Rena, and we settled in Amherstview in around June of 1968. What brought me to Amherstview was just by chance, really. I obtained a job teaching at LaSalle Secondary School over in Pittsburgh Township, and I had to find a place to live, of course. And a couple of lads I met said, well, we got a place out in Amherstview. That was a very interesting experience at that time. Amherstview was perhaps 2,000 people in 1968. I used to drive down County Road 6, where the railroad tracks are, and it was a gravel road. And I remember in the springtime too, there were tons of frogs that used to cross that road. Great community, great place to live, raise a family. Didn't want to go anywhere else. I was the last reeve of Rediscovering Township from 1994 to 1997. And I was the first reeve of Loyalist Township, 1997 to 2000. In 1985, council gets together. Jack Kippen was reeve at the time, and it was budget time. So CEO, or clerk, I guess they called him at that time, Ross Blakely said, well, we'll go in the back kitchen here. We all got a piece of paper and a pencil. We sat down on a Saturday morning. We had Chief Dobkin from the fire hall, you know, and different department heads, and we were going to strike the budget. And I looked at my colleague, Ian Wilson, and we sort of rolled our eyes. And I said, what is going on here? That was 1985. The council of that time, I don't know how to describe it, as proactive, I guess, and looking outward more. We were more like dealing with just the basic issues of the time. After that 3-year term, I decided, if you really want to get some things done, it's time to start moving up. My friend Ian Wilson, who was a colleague, he decided he's going to run for Reeve and I'll run for Deputy Reeve because I wasn't thinking about that. So it's 1988, I'm Deputy Reeve, Ian Wilson's the Reeve, we're county reps and we're also serving the people of Ernestown. And we start looking outward, I guess, a bit. We got involved with seeing to it that the initial steps for buying conservation property, Parrots Bay, got underway. So that was a real plus. The key thing for any politician, local politician, and I'll focus in on that, is you serve the needs of the day, but you got to be thinking 10 years down the road. You really do have to be proactive in that regard. You're always thinking about the future, okay? When I think of Jack Davey, who was, he lived up in Wilton, a local farmer, worked at Celanese Fibers. He served as Deputy Reeve for years here. Great family on the Simmons Road. Back in probably the 50s, they purchased an area of land called Violet landfill site. Can you imagine the foresight to buy that in the 1950s? To this very day, Loyalist still has a landfill site. But that's an example of, forward thinking, okay? Including purchasing way back then in the 50s, 75 acres of land from a local farmer on County Road 6, where we have that small industrial park, and they probably still have maybe some land on the other side. So that's what you got to do. So carrying on with my story about looking to the future, we got wind that Canadian Pacific Railroad was selling some of their land. We, on behalf of the people of Ernestown Township at that time, for approximately $1 million, bought approximately 800 acres of agricultural land down on what is now Taylor Kidd. And it's going to be the new site, the new home of the $1.4 billion battery plant. Now, that was a good deal. And we knew one day, that's going to come into fruition. I'm so happy to hear that it will be, So we always had a good, solid core of industrial taxation. And that was really, really special. So the time came when I had to decide what I was going to do. And so I personally decided I was going to give a run for Reeve in 1966. At that time, no one decided to run against me. So I became Reeve of Ernestown. And meantime, lots of interesting things had transpired. We had acquired a great deal of conservation land in Parrots Bay. Then there's a change of government in Ontario, and Premier Harris comes in, and he rightly decides that we got to have less government in Ontario. I think there were almost 1,000 little villages and townships and towns and cities throughout Ontario, so they wanted to lessen that number. Basically, we didn't have a problem with that, our council at the time, but we were concerned as to how the chips would lie. And the city of Kingston, they were pretty aggressive, and they coveted a large portion of Ernestown Township, okay? And they expected that that portion was going to become part of this new city. They gave us some time to come up with Plan B because the government at the time was adamant that there were going to be changes, And we were then under the gun to see how we could save our community of Ernestown Township and our county. Now, a lot of people would say, well, why would you bother? But the fact was that we didn't see it as a good business venture. We were looking at it from that perspective. Plus, we had a different history, our whole history of Lennox and Addington County. people were happy that we were trying to preserve our independence and our own identity. So we had to come up with a deal, and I'll tell you, it was a lot of hard work. See the family for a bit, have a bite to eat, and we'll be off to meetings down to the courthouse in Napanee. Negotiations. And finally, though, we formed a consensus, got together, I think surprised a lot of people, came up with a plan where we would downsize to 4 communities, Stone Mills, the town of Napanee, and a new community that eventually would be called Loyalist. And how's that going to fall out? Well, there's Ernesttown, village of Bath, which is a natural because it used to be called Ernesttown and they've been our neighbors for years, even though they weren't thrilled by the idea. And there's Amherst Island. Nobody was really interested in taking on Amherst Island because Amherst Island, well, basically didn't, it costs a lot of money, to run dear little Amherst Island. But I'm really glad they're part of Loyalist. A great sense of history and community. I just love to see how they are so proud of their island. I remember Keith Miller and Shirley being so nice to me when I was the new Reeve, and Keith gave me some lessons how to drive a tractor because we had international plowing match that all the Reeves got to attend. That was a highlight, but it was only a natural because Amherstview, which was just part of Ernesttown Township, but an integral part, always looked over there, and in fact, that's where the name came from, Amherstview. So that's how we got together, and the rest, they say, is history. At the end of that particular term, I decided I'd like to stick around for another term and see these new communities together because we had quite a challenge ahead of us. Here's a new community called Loyalist. We got Amherst Island and Bath. Not everyone came in with open arms. It was mutually agreed compromise for us to make sure we weren't part of Kingston, pure and simple. Gee, we weren't in office more than, was it a month or 2 months? And we got this thing called an ice storm. Oh, was that a humdinger? But that was also, it showed you the strength of community. It was wonderful how people came together and helped one another. So at that time, everybody rallied and we survived the ice storm. We got underway taking care of this new community. The council at the time, we expanded our passion for, I guess you might say, saving land. We purchased the Nielsen General Store over there on the island. We purchased the owl woods from the folks that owned that so we could make sure that the owls had a home. Babcock Mill, there's another treasure that we saved. And what a treasure it is to this day. I'll tell you, there's nothing like saving land for future generations that can do us proud. And I'm very, very proud of that too, that took place. But there comes a time when everyone has to know, as one of my predecessors, later Mayor Lowry, mentioned that it's time for us to move on. And that time came. I decided I was 57 years of age. I had served 15 years in local government. It was time to pass the torch. I really think it's important that people know when to move on. And so at the age of 57, as Bill said, you are now history. I moved on. Always kept an interest, of course, and a passion for politics. Still interested very much so in this community. It's a great place to live, raise a family, and the future.
As we look out across the waters from Amherstview, we can see a nearby island that shares its namesake. Amherst Island, situated parallel to Amherstview, was named after General Geoffrey Amherst, Commander-in-Chief of British forces. Legend has it that the fate of Amherst Island was held during a card game in Ireland in 1823. Ownership of Amherst Island changed hands, and to this day, there continue to be Irish lineage farming the land. These communities have remained connected in a unique way, especially during the winter months, when in the past, Lake Ontario froze over, providing a lifeline and winter roadway for the residents of the island and their mainland neighbors. In addition to the connection of the water that links these two places together, there is a strong sense of community and place, making them more than just a destination, but a home for those that call it their own.
When we were first married, we had an old sow in the barn, and she had pigs, and when they're birthing, they get pretty crazy. And he didn't like raising pigs at all. But I woke up one night and he was shaking me, and I thought, he wasn't the one. What's going on? What's wrong? Oh, he said, I was dreaming the old sow attacked me, and I had her by both ears, and I was shaking the daylights out of her. I think he was putting me on, but
But you were cautious after that.
yeah, I was careful. Shirley Ann Miller.
And Keith Albert Miller. I was born July the 13th, 1940.
August 21st, 1940.
I was born here on the third concession. Shirley came later.
I came in 1964. My first husband was still alive then, and we moved to the island, bought a house in the village. It was $1,000. It's still there in the village, and I sold it for $1,000.
Way back when it first settled, there were 1,600 people here. The very fact that it's hard to get to now it was easy then because everything was boats. So the island was very accessible, and when the French settled here, there were 1,600 people lived here at one time. My family came from County Down, Ireland in 1848. The whole island was owned by one person, and so the people that came here were people that he was associated with, or families from Ireland. They were all related or friends or whatever. He decided where he was going to settle, and he went back to Ireland to get his act together and pack up his family. But on the way back, he got shipwrecked on Sable Island.
Is your great-grandfather?
Great-grandfather, yes, and he was injured badly, but somehow or other he ended up in a wheelchair from those injuries, but he managed to build the farm first. It was a steel-wheeled wheelchair with hand cranks to make it go. And it was said that he couldn't partake in the farm work, but he rode this wheelchair to the creek every day and pumped the water for the cows, because that's something he could do.
Keith's grandmother was a Tugwell, and they were some of the first ones here. They were Irish too. Yeah. And it was Caleb and Mary Tugwell, and this is their son Sam and his family in front of their log cabin where they lived on the third concession. His grandmother's name was Hannah Ashdown Tugwell, which I think is such a beautiful name. And some of these old pictures that Morris Huggaboon took are priceless, of the old ferry and being dragged out and back into service in the springtime after the, what goes up through and broke the ice up at the
Coast Guard.
The Coast Guard, the Coast Guard.
But they didn't used to be doing.
The old wooden boat.
Some years we had the Salvage Prince, which was a tugboat from Kingston would come and open it up. But the ferry was always a problem, and the ice was always a problem. It was something you had to deal with daily. If you crossed the ice in the morning, it would be entirely different at night. The whole lake can change in one day, and the pressure cracks go 10 feet high, and other ones open up, and there'd be water at the shore some days. And so when we traveled to Kingston or Napanee, you always had an axe in the trunk of your car so you could chop down or bridge this crack. My dad was a dairy farmer, and I started there when I was 6 years old, I guess. And well, on the wall was a 60-year certificate, so we just did it always. For a couple of years, I got badly hurt myself in 1958, and when I was recuperating, I went to Toronto and I worked for a couple of years at a car dealership selling Volkswagens of all things. And I decided that wasn't for me, so I came back and did the farm thing full time. Farming was hard to make money. Any extra money you had to work, so I used to work out for the township once in a while. The very first job I ever did, the road super, was very frugal. And we had to put in a culvert up at the end of the second, and the culvert that was wrecked was elm planks. Like, it wasn't a steel culvert, it was more like a bridge. So he brought some new planks, and we had to use some olds, but I spent all day straightening the nails out of the old bridge so we could put them in the new bridge. That was one of my first township jobs.
My first job was at the old House of Providence. And then I went to St. Mary's, worked there, and my mother took sick and I didn't go back to school after that. I met my first husband then, and we went to Toronto. And I worked in the psych hospital for a while.
Then you got married.
Haven't worked since. How many years have you been at the dump?
26 years.
At the landfill, I'm sorry.
26 years at the landfill, the 1st of February. I went there to, the environment people came and decided the township had to clean up their act, and so I think I was actually on council at the time, and I decided I could do something to help them do that, and I'm still there 26 years later. Anyway, it's been a blast.
His first office was an old outhouse.
An old outhouse. You did a painting of it. You
Yeah.
must have it.
Oh, yeah, somewhere. To me, every picture is a story without words, and if I pick up a picture and the story would come to me and I'd want to keep it, then I'd want to paint the picture. I could always draw, and my dad was a carpenter, and we'd go when Mom would help him at nights, and he'd draw pictures on the wall, and he would draw houses in perspective. Which I never knew it had a name. And then when I came to the island, there was nothing, no souvenirs here, so I did pen and ink hasty notes for the of the island things, and then we had started the Beacon, and I did cartoons for the Beacon. I don't know why they didn't tar and feather me, for some of them were pretty iffy, but the editor wouldn't write the story to go with the cartoon because he didn't want to get sued, so it was word of mouth that everybody found out what was going on. And then a man came here and taught a night school class in watercolors, and he was really good, and that was the first time I knew about paint and paper, real paint and real paper and brushes. And because I liked to take pictures and drove the school bus for so long. I had all kinds of material, and I started painting. I had my first show in 1979 here on the island. Keith wouldn't go because he was sure I was going to be heartbroken. Nobody's going to come to the island and buy paintings. But we pretty near sold out. I think maybe we did. I can't remember exactly. And that was the beginning of it. And just kept on. Had several juried shows and shows at Glebe Studio and
the museum, your favorite one.
yeah, that was my favorite one. That was the nicest one. Over 300. I can't be sure. I keep thinking of them one every now and again and wonder. I'll come across the photo I used and wonder how come I didn't take a picture of it. I just started taking pictures so I could remember them, but I didn't always do that. But there's a lot of them around.
My favorite painting is that tugboat. Because I don't know why, because I like tugboats, I guess. And I did have a ride on it as well. Across the lake once. But I don't know, that one's the one I ended up with anyway, and I like it. But they're all good. They're all nice paintings to have.
You get attached to them somehow. There's one I tried to buy back because I paid dentist bills with them for years. And bartered, and the bill was getting kind of high, so I took this painting that I got done, showed it to the dentist, and she liked it and wanted it. And when I really looked at it again, I thought, oh, but she wouldn't sell it back to me. So. Tangle Creek Falls was maybe my favorite. It was the biggest. It was 6 feet by 40 inches. And I painted the top of it on the table, and then I hung the canvas from chains on the wall and painted it, the rest of it hanging down the wall. Our kids have a lot of them. And then I started helping other people with watercolors, and then I learned a lot because people would have problems that I might never have run into, and that might make me think of how would I demonstrate that. And then I'd start another painting, and just so they could see how they might deal with it. Like I don't know any rules, or I just know what works for me. And I did a lot of classes for Loyalist College, and then in '89 I started having people come Friday afternoons, and we'd drink tea and gossip and paint, and got to be good friends.
That's what I thought was going on today when I saw all the cars. We're into the art class again.
It's amazing the people that have the same interest who come together who would never come together in any other circumstance. I call myself an artist so that I don't have to explain that I don't paint houses or woodwork or windows. I don't understand the whole thing, but that's all right. I just have fun. It's what I like to do because I like the people and I like the place, and I'd like to keep as much of it alive as possible.
I've come through place of every kind, weather rolled from east to west, but a pretty place I left behind, I will always mind the best. And that place lies in Erin Isle, and the odds and county town, conspicuous only 3 miles from Port Fairy Town. When I sailed away to Canada in 1835 to flee the wretched poverty, for my Ireland I cried. But a new lease of life I found in the heart of Amherst Island. A tenant farmer I was bound to clear this land so wild. And though 5,000 miles away and an ocean lies between, I remember still and always will my school days at our Keene. Now 70 years have passed and gone, and I'm both old and blind, but in lonely hours I think upon those youthful happy times. And though 5,000 miles away and an ocean lies between, I remember still and always will my school days at our Keene. And though 5,000 miles away and an ocean lies between, I remember still and always will my school days at our Keene.